The Farris family of Alpharetta, Georgia, was both very wealthy and extremely dysfunctional. When their patriarch, 58-year-old Gary Farris, was found dead, his remains set aflame in the burn pile on the family's property. The rest of the family began pointing fingers at each other. Over the following years, the family's dirty laundry was aired for the world to see. Hi there, I'm Kevin, and welcome to Just Thought Lounge. There's a lot to take on board in today's case. It's the story of a large family dealing with a lot of conflict. Sorting through all of the accusations and trying to separate fact from fiction is, at times, a very messy task. This case took over 6 years to reach trial and a verdict, and many still question the conclusion. Let's take a look. Before we dive into this case, I'd like to take a moment to address the importance of protecting your personal information. Keeping your information private should not be complicated. That is why I'm happy to introduce to you the sponsor of this video, Incogni. Sadly, data privacy continues to be of increasing concern year after year because the number of data breaches are rising. This means that a growing list of data brokers have your information. Once your data finds its way to a people search site, for example, anyone can perform a basic search to gain access to your personal details, such as addresses, employment history, political beliefs, hobbies, relatives, and so much more. If you ever wondered how marketers keep getting your number, the answer is data brokers. They often sell your phone number to companies to build call lists, and that is only the tip of the iceberg. Just last week, BT Group, the UK's massive telecom giant, experienced a serious breach, resulting in the alleged theft of 500 gigabytes of data. The group responsible, the Black Basta ransomware gang, claimed to have acquired users' data and personal documents, including financial information. They have threatened to release all of this freely online. The FBI reported that Black Basta affiliates have breached over 500 organizations worldwide, including other high-profile victims such as healthcare companies and government contractors. Your sensitive personal information is spreading quickly, which means it's difficult to maintain any control over where it ends up and how it's used. That is where Incogni comes in. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf and makes removal requests for your personal data. The whole process is automated. Once removed, the same sites are rescanned regularly to ensure that your info does not find its way back. Incogni also provides regular privacy reports to update you on the progress of each request. To take back control of your personal data with Incogni, use code ThoughtLounge at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. Many thanks to Incogni for offering such a useful service, and of course, for sponsoring this video. Gary and Melody Farris lived on a 10-acre property in Cherokee County, Georgia. By 2010, the couple had been married for over 30 years. They had raised 4 children: Christopher, Emily, Scott, and Amanda. All but Scott had moved away from the family property and started their own families. On the sprawling estate, composed of pastures, woodland, and a pond, they established a hobby farm. The Farrises kept horses, goats, and a chicken coop. Inside, the decor was worthy of a spread in Country Living magazine. Melody Farris, a self-professed clean freak, kept a very clean and organized home. Beyond the beautiful facade of the family estate, the Farrises had deep-rooted issues. Gary, a successful corporate lawyer, had established his firm's office in Atlanta years prior. Standing at 6'3" and weighing over 300 pounds, Gary had been affectionately nicknamed Big Daddy by his children. The lawyer was a force to be reckoned with, and not only in business dealings. With Gary's success came both wealth as well as tensions at home. Since moving to the farm on Purcell Lane, he and his wife had lived separate lives under the same roof. Melody stayed in the master suite on the upper level, while Gary kept his bedroom in the basement, where he also had a small living room area and his office. Between Gary's busy work schedule and the arrangements in the house, it was not surprising that, on occasion, the two could go a day or more without crossing paths. On July 5th, 2018, youngest daughter Amanda was visiting her mother at the farm when both realized that no one had seen or spoken to Gary for a full day since the afternoon of July 3rd. He had not attended family events with them the day before. It was around 10 a.m. when Scott, who lived in a loft apartment above the barn, arrived at the main house to find his mother and sister discussing the potential whereabouts of his father. Concerned, they began searching the property. In his father's bedroom, Scott checked for his CPAP machine. This machine uses air pressure to keep breathing airways open while you sleep. Gary used the machine unfailingly every night. It sat on his nightstand, indicating to Scott at least that his father was not unexpectedly traveling for work. His father's Mercedes was also still parked at the house. The family grew concerned that Gary, at the age of 58, with already established health issues, had collapsed somewhere on the property. Their worst fears were realized when Scott approached and examined the burn pile located in the woodland. Gary often used this area to burn refuse and debris from the farm and had lit one ablaze just 2 days before. As Scott looked down, he was certain he was viewing the charred remains of a human body. He believed it was his father.
My father has come up missing, and we just searched the property. It's a small farm, and I just found something near the farm that doesn't. He was burning brush. Now there's stuff in the fire that it could be him. I don't know.
Okay. All right, sir.
We've been walking around looking for him, and I went where the fire's still smoldering. And I'm ex-military. I was deployed to Iraq. I've seen what burned up bodies look like, and this looks like a body.
Okay.
When emergency responders arrived on Purcell Lane, they found the burn pile was still smoldering. The heat emanating off the pile was intense. Melody and Scott had both recalled seeing it burning on the night of July 3rd. Experts combed through the over 30 pounds of remains found in the burn pile. Through dental records, it was determined that they had, in fact, found Gary Farris. Whether the 58-year-old had experienced a horrible accident, perhaps a heart attack, stumbling into the flames, and was somehow unable to save himself, remained one of the possibilities being considered at that time. He did have high blood pressure and had experienced undiagnosed episodes of strange symptoms, including sudden exhaustion, for years. Except, had this been a horrible accident, there should have been indications of how he had traveled to the woods. The RTV, Gary's preferred mode of transport around the property, had been parked at the house. The family had a small Kubota tractor, but it was located near to the shed. The burn pile sat roughly 100 yards from the house, and Gary never walked the property, always preferring to drive a small vehicle. An obvious conclusion was that Gary had not gone to the burn pile alone. Someone had brought him there. This sad fact was unfortunately confirmed when a burnt bullet was found lodged in the remains of Gary's ribs. The bullet was not in a location consistent with the shot having been self-inflicted. The grandfather had been shot to death and then collapsed or placed in the burn pile.
Stand up for me. Huh? Yeah. I know.
She wasn't talking.
Had a rough day.
There was no evidence in the woods that the shooting had taken place there. No blood was found anywhere near to the burn pile. In fact, there was no sign that Gary had been killed anywhere on the grounds surrounding the house. Inside, however, investigators narrowed in on the seating area of Gary's basement living quarters. Small droplets of blood were visible on the stairs leading from the kitchen. The stains had been cleaned, some only slightly diluted. At the top of the steps, Blue Star was used to illuminate where another small blood droplet had been cleaned. The trail appeared to lead down the stairs, ending near to the counter. Feet away between the chair and an ottoman was a single spent bullet. It was found to have Gary's DNA. Detectives deduced that he must have been shot at least twice, though the fire had destroyed most of the physical evidence that would offer any further clarity. Curiously, there was no blood found within the immediate vicinity of the projectile in the basement. There were no markings on the walls or the floor to show its potential trajectory. It was as though the projectile had appeared there independently, or that the scene had been cleaned very thoroughly and effectively, yet somehow this single bullet had been missed. Following the death of its patriarch, the Farris family secrets began spilling out. Scott Farris, after serving in the army and doing a tour in Iraq, had returned home some years earlier and had not found regular work. He helped out on the farm, but then in his early 30s, was essentially living off of his parents while staying in the loft above the barn. According to Melody, it was not only Scott who was leeching from his parents. Her other son, Chris, had been routinely stealing money from them, copying credit card numbers and cashing checks without permission. Text messages from Gary to Chris only 2 weeks before his death supported these assertions. But perhaps the most scandalous of the revelations pertained to Melody and her multiple affairs. The first of these was a roughly 2-year-long relationship with a man named Ted Wiley, which had ended around 2009 or 2010. Investigators found that around the time their relationship ended in 2010, Gary had filed for divorce. He told his children that this had been prompted by their mother taking out a home equity loan to free up funds for her use without his consent. The pair eventually reconciled, and Gary withdrew the filing. However, the damage had been done. From that point onwards, Gary controlled and monitored the family finances, particularly his wife's spending, extremely closely. Despite this, it seems she found ways to continue spending. Sometimes she would claim her card was not working and borrow a credit card held by one of her children. A message from Gary to Melody in March 2018 read, "Your profligate spending must stop. I work every day, and between you, Scott, and Chris, I cannot keep up. You treat me like I don't exist, which is offensive given how you repeatedly betray me." With tensions in the marriage still running high in 2014, Melody began a new romance. She met Roy Barton Jr., who goes by Rusty, through her second cousin, an elderly woman named Martha Jane Barton. Rusty was Martha's stepson. Under the guise of taking Martha to medical appointments and otherwise assisting with her care, Melody regularly made extended trips to see her and Rusty in Tennessee. Over the years, she did a poor job of hiding the relationship, even inviting Rusty as a guest to her daughter Emily's wedding. They chatted and danced throughout the evening, while Gary, not wishing to ruin his daughter's big day, stayed silent. But he knew that his marriage was in ruins. She kept a second cell phone to communicate with Rusty, which she tried to keep secret. All 4 of her adult children had their suspicions of their mother's ongoing affair, suspicions which were eventually confirmed. After Gary's death, investigators spoke with Melody. They had not yet delivered the shocking news that Gary's death was not an accident, but based upon the discovery of the bullet, was now considered a homicide. Melody began by suggesting that Gary had experienced a medical episode and had fallen into the fire. It must have been an accident. Then she was asked about what firearms were in the house. It rapidly became apparent in which direction the 58-year-old grandmother wished to direct the investigation, towards her son, Scott.
My dad had some pistols. But now Scott has them, and I don't know what's left of them. I don't know. Scott took them, he was in the military, and Scott took them, and took them to Columbia, where he was. And supposedly the house got broken into, but now I do know that there was a pistol over the barn for a while, and I haven't seen it in a long time. Scott took it and put it away.
Do you remember what kind of pistol, what it looked like? Or
I have no idea.
don't have any
I
idea?
don't know anything about guns.
They've been sifting through the remains in the ashes, and they have found a projectile and some bones.
Okay.
Does not appear to be self-inflicted.
Okay. So, I mean, do we know what kind or what?
Well, they have the projectile, so we're, like I've told some of your family, we're on the scene. We have very limited resources scientifically to do the tests and the measurements and the things that we need to do. So we don't know what caliber
Right.
at this time,
I mean,
but it's
like
going to
I
be
said-
easily determined.
Oh,
Scott had also been asked about guns in the house and pistols in particular. He told detectives that when searching for the television remote in the basement weeks earlier, he opened a drawer behind the sofa and spotted a snub-nosed chrome handgun in a leather holster. He had not seen the gun before or since.
So Scott is the one that told us about a month and a half ago that he saw the pistol in the basement. The AT&T guy was there to do some repairs or to do something. He was trying to find the remote,
I don't know.
found the pistol. That pistol's not there anymore.
Well,
Where-
I didn't know anything
where it was.
about one.
Didn't know anything about a pistol. So you were the last one to see Gary alive on Tuesday night.
Right.
The timeline of the events at the house on July 3rd was critical to determining when Gary had been killed and who could have been present on the property at that time. Melody told police that she had last spoken with Gary around 5:30 or 6 p.m. on July 3rd to discuss dinner plans. The burn pile had been set ablaze around that time.
So he started the fire before you guys discussed dinner.
It was long about the same. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when we were in and out discussing all that. But yeah, I mean, at some point in time when we were discussing the dinner and that kind of stuff, I said, why did you start that fire? And, well, what difference does it make? Well, because it's dry, it's 4th of July, it's, I can give you 100 reasons. You set my house on fire once before. And I just told him, I said, Gary, you've got to watch that fire. But even that night when I was out chasing horses and stuff, I mean, it was blazing light.
After one or more of their horses escaped, Melody spent much of the evening trying to catch and return them to the stable, she said. She phoned Scott asking him to return to help her. Scott had spent the day golfing and swimming and returned to the farm around 11:30 p.m. Footage from his golfing pal's doorbell camera confirmed this timeline. It showed Scott leaving his home at 10:55. The drive back would have been about a half an hour. Melody estimated Scott had returned earlier than that, closer to 10:30. Regardless, there were no animals loose when he arrived. Everyone, but Gary it seems, had gone to bed. Gary went to dinner on the night of July 3rd and returned home sometime around 9:30 p.m. His cell phone tracked his movement home from the restaurant that night. No one was able to reach him the following day, July 4th, though his phone was moving around the property. Perhaps the strongest evidence pointing towards the window of time for the murder was from Gary's CPAP machine. This showed that the device had not been used on the night of July 3rd. Gary did not sleep that night. However, data points showed his phone in motion from 5:52 a.m. the next day. For roughly an hour in the morning until 7:21, it was at the burn pile. It then moved from the burn pile to the house before finally stopping at 9:05 a.m. and remained there. Investigators began to believe that Melody had committed the murder sometime around 10 p.m. while she claimed to be chasing horses around the property. Melody's own lies to investigators had planted the initial suspicions. Melody first lied to detectives about having any extramarital relationships, only admitting to her ongoing affair with Rusty Barton once she had been found out. Indeed, she not only failed to disclose the relationship, but also that she had been speaking with him on the phone for a cumulative 114 minutes over 3 separate calls on the night of the murder. Had she shot her husband, panicked, and called her lover to talk through what to do next? Melody also lied about an early morning shopping trip to Walmart on July 4th. The receipt showed Melody purchasing cleaning products, including Clorox bleach. There was one more move that Melody made that night that may seem innocuous, yet proved extremely incriminating. Around midnight on the night that Gary was killed, Melody used his debit card to make a purchase of phone minutes for her second secret cell phone, the one that she used to carry on her affair. Gary would have been notified of the transaction and certainly would have had questions about it. It seems that was not a concern for Melody. Was this purchase an indication that she knew at that time that her husband was already dead and on the burn pile? Rusty spoke with police in July 2018 and informed them that Melody had made a damning statement to him the day before the discovery of Gary's remains.
Could you maybe diagnose the first call that would be of interest to us, not the time or anything about what happened?
I think there was only one conversation that is what you're looking for.
Okay.
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 And it was the last conversation.
Okay.
And
Would it be safe to say there wasn't much talking after that?
no, that was the end of the conversation.
When let's talk about that conversation that you feel.
Probably the last minute of the last conversation, she said, Gary is in the burn pile. No, she said, he is in the burn pile. And I said, what? And she said, he's in the burn pile. And I said, do not say another word and do not tell me anything. I do not need to know.
Law enforcement then convinced Rusty to begin recording his phone conversations with Melody in the hope of catching her in another incriminating admission. The scheme failed. Rusty ultimately informed Melody of the plan, even purchasing her a prepaid cell phone so she would be comfortable that the police were not listening to their calls. Nonetheless, a year after Gary's death, she was arrested and charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and concealing the death of another.
Even I thought, based on the evidence that was presented today, I believe, just like she told me when I first met her, she's 100% innocent of these charges.
From the county jail, law enforcement were able to once again listen in to Melody and Rusty's calls.
This is a prepaid call from an inmate at a correctional facility. Three-way or call waiting is not allowed. Your call has been accepted.
You all right?
No.
What's wrong?
Well, like a long time ago, I said stop talking.
Right.
I haven't done anything.
I know that, darling.
But somehow the other, what you keep talking about, you're going to single-handedly hang me.
Melody had made multiple statements over the years expressing her desire to see Gary dead. In 2016, to her neighbor Terry, she wrote that after an argument with her husband, she yelled to him, "I hope he dies alone and a gruesome death." In April 2018, Gary told at least 2 of his children that he thought their mother was trying to poison him. At that time, he was rushed to the hospital after eating cookies his wife made for him following an argument. This particular allegation raised more questions about his health. For years, Gary had been in and out of the hospital and doctor's offices, receiving treatment for what he called his spells. These were episodes in which he experienced dry mouth, a burning sensation in his throat, and sudden exhaustion. By July 2018, he had concluded that Melody was most likely behind these undiagnosed health issues. The day before he died, Gary took a video of a plate Melody had smashed in a rage. He had left it in the basement instead of carrying it upstairs to be washed. Her statement at that time was something like, "I cannot wait until the day you're dead."
When you leave a plate, forget to take it upstairs. A minor temper tantrum. Of course, I had supper tonight and it was 6 for me, so I'm sure I'll be feeling poorly here within minutes, but we'll see.
When you shrink the world, no robbery, no home invasions, no enemies, no road rage, nothing like that. When you shrink the world, in a case like this, husband and wife, wife kills husband, husband dies. The answer to the question, who did it, sits right there. Melody Walker Farris.
The state prosecutors had a strong circumstantial case against Melody Farris. But when it came to outlining a clear theory of the crime itself, the physical evidence was lacking. They posited that the blood droplets leading from the kitchen into the basement where the projectile was found suggested that Melody must have shot Gary at least twice inside the house and then moved him to the burn pile. Though the blood found in the house was limited. Investigators did not locate the kind of spatter stains one would expect to find at the scene of a homicide with multiple gunshot wounds. Perhaps the most significant gap in the state's theory was how Melody, at roughly 120 pounds, could have moved her husband at 6'3" and over 300 pounds over 100 yards from the house to the burn pile. There were two ways that they claimed she could have done so: the RTV and the small tractor. Scott testified that the Kubota was parked in an unusual position when he began searching for his father on July 5th. It was sitting next to the lean-to shed instead of under the overhang where it was nearly always parked overnight. There were small droplets of blood found on the side step that came back as a match to Gary. Melody's DNA was identified on the shifter of the tractor. However, touch DNA swabs were collected from 9 points on the tractor, including the steering wheel, the loader control, directional shifter, and ignition key. The tractor was covered in Blue Star. There were no further stains detected. Results on the RTV were similar. There was no indication that it had been used to transport Gary after the murder. The defense was also quick to point out that the landscaping outside of the home, from the back doors leading from the basement towards the woods, were untouched. The perfectly manicured lawn remained unmarred by any tracks from an RTV, a tractor, or anything else. All 4 of the Farris children took the stand at their mother's trial. The eldest 3, Christopher, Scott, and Emily, testified for the prosecution. They spoke of the tensions in their parents' marriage and the years of dysfunction, anger, and affairs. The deep-rooted issues were traced to 2011, after Melody's first affair and Gary's divorce filing. The children knew she continued her extramarital activities and that it was impacting the entire family and causing their father emotional anguish.
He told me that he was very depressed, and he said that each day with my mother was pretty much the worst day of his life versus the day before. Like every day was the worst day of his life.
But you do believe in your heart that your mother loved your father. Yes?
At a point in her life, yes.
At a point in her life.
Mm-hmm.
So how about on July the 3rd of 2018? Do you believe that your mother loved your father?
No.
Chris and Scott both spoke of their father's mysterious health episodes they called spells. Gary's suspicions that they were caused by Melody grew in the weeks and days before his death. Gary told his sons about the allegedly poisoned cookies. Scott told the jury about his mother's outburst the day before the murder when she smashed a dirty plate that his father had left out.
So, best way I can describe it was he would get very weak. He talked very thick tongue, like his tongue was swollen up, and some people would think he was drunk, the way he kind of slurred, but he just got very exhausted and wanted to go lay down. And when he would have them, that's what he did. He would go and lay down, either on the couch or go lay in bed, and he would sleep for a couple hours. He's been to the doctor. He went to his physician all the time. They thought it was a vitamin B deficiency and maybe a testosterone problem, or nobody could figure out what was causing these spells. And this was a bad one. I mean, I was worried for the way he was acting. So he stayed in the hospital, I want to say 1 or 2 nights.
He said, "Chris, I think your mother is trying to poison me."
And what was your reaction?
I said, "Excuse me." He said, "Well," it's like, "she spent the day screaming at me, and I was watching TV in the theater room, and all of a sudden she brings me down some cookies. And I ate the cookies, and my throat started burning, and then I started feeling bad." And I told him, Are you like, what? He's, "Oh, I'm just probably paranoid or something." Some paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he kind of shrugged it off.
Sure.
And that's what he said.
My dad was on the other side of the property, and she came out of my dad's office doors and screaming and cussing, and she threw a plate up against the wall of the house, and she screamed, "I can't wait till the day he fucking dies. I can't wait till the day I don't have to live with him anymore."
In retrospect, it was all too obvious that the family was headed towards the kind of tragedy they experienced when Gary was found on July 5th. However, at that time, it was nonetheless shocking to everyone involved.
She said, "Well, your daddy's missing." And I said, "What do you mean he's missing?" And she said, "Well, we're out here looking for him and we can't find him anywhere." And I said, "Well, go look. Are his clothes still there? Is his CPAP machine still there? Like, did he leave? And did he just leave? And I said, go look for that stuff. Look for his keys, look for his phone, look for his wallet, go look for that stuff." And she just kind of was like, okay, and got off the phone with me.
And I started walking that way, and I believe I got either halfway across the dam or got to the other side, and then Melody called me. And she called me and asked, "Have you thrown a dead goat on the burn pile?" I'm like, "No, we haven't had anything to die, and also I wouldn't throw it on the burn pile." And she said, "Well, come up here and look at this." And I walk up and look, and I can already start seeing bones. And then I looked down, and it appeared to me that it was the inside of a skull. The backside was gone. And you could see the little blood vessels, I think it was, but it didn't look like a rock or something. So I grabbed a very, very small corner of it, and I lifted it up just enough to where I saw teeth in the eye socket, and I immediately put it right back. And, I was crouched down, and she was standing right there next to me. And I raise up, I put my hand on, across her chest and push her back and go, "These are human remains. I am calling 911 right now. Nobody's allowed down here."
Melody's behavior following the discovery only served to heighten suspicions.
Her reaction to finding out her, mom had a heart attack and her dad dying and, anything bad happened like that, it was a complete different reaction to what she reacted to when the paramedic and deputy said, "Yes, those were human remains."
At this point in time, my brain had kind of already switched to thinking something had happened to him that wasn't falling in a fire.
Why did it switch?
Because of my mother's behavior when the police were there and just how she was acting.
What was that behavior? How was she acting?
Just not like somebody whose husband had just been found in a burn pile.
You know, Mama, like things aren't lining up. Your story, because like she would start going into like, well, when Scott reached down and picked up your daddy's skull, and I was just like that's the thing is like things aren't lining up. Like your story's different than their story, and it's like it just doesn't make sense to me. And the conversation did not end well. She ended up storming out.
Both of Gary's sons were asked directly if they had any part in their father's death. They were, after all, the two individuals with the size and strength necessary to feasibly move their father into the woodland. They were also the two suspects that Melody and her defense team repeatedly alleged could be the real killer.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of your father?
No.
Did you have anything to do with the concealment of your father and the grandfather of your children?
No.
Did you murder your father?
I absolutely did not murder my father. Without a doubt, I loved him.
Look at me. Did you have anything to do to help your mother dispose of and burn your father?
Absolutely not.
Tell me, not me.
No. Like I said, I love my father. He was the backbone.
The defense pointed the finger primarily at Scott Farris, who they believed made up the story of finding a gun in the house. That was a convenient lie to frame his mother. Law enforcement did not perform any forensic testing on his loft apartment above the barn. Experts testified that they focused on areas with visible indications of blood, such as the stairs and the basement. But the defense pointed to Scott's bathroom, which should have been tested for the opposite reason. It was found to be extremely clean, suspiciously clean. This, they said, was uncharacteristic of a single man in his 30s living above a barn. But what was more curious was what was found in his nightstand: a box of .38 caliber ammunition. Scott did not own a gun that would fire it. They pointed again to what Melody had told detectives in July 2018, that Scott conveniently stated that his .38 caliber handgun had been stolen from his home in Columbus years earlier during a break-in and robbery. No police report was ever filed with law enforcement in Columbus to support this claim. So, where was his gun? Scott, of course, was also the one to spot his father's remains in the burn pile and stated with certainty that they were human remains. Prior to that discovery, he had checked a trail camera in the woods, which was set up to capture deer. He testified that he found nothing of value captured on the camera, so he deleted the images off of the SD card. The final images were recovered by law enforcement. They showed him walking past and then approaching the camera. Not exactly incriminating footage, though his choice to delete the images raised eyebrows. If Scott was the killer, what the defense could not explain was the movement of Gary's cell phone the morning after he must have been killed. As Gary's phone moved around the property between 7 and 9 a.m., Melody was the only other person known to be at the farm. Scott had met a friend for an early round of golf that morning at just before 7 a.m. For the prosecution, Chris, Emily, and Scott also recalled their mother's unwillingness to even have a funeral for her husband of 38 years. To Chris, she reportedly stated, "Why have a funeral when there's nothing left?" They also asserted that she became aggressive about repaying money that had been lent to them by their father, repeatedly making demands for repayment. Emily testified that her mother was insistent she hand over a letter from the coroner that confirmed Gary's death. paperwork that could be potentially used to claim his life insurance. It was this life insurance policy that the prosecutors claimed was Melody's motive. Although Gary had earned millions throughout his career, the family had managed to spend money nearly as quickly as he made it. Within a year of his death, with his income no longer coming in, the farm went into foreclosure. The defense argued that this meant money was a senseless motive for Melody. She was worse off after the murder. However, Gary's life insurance policies, including additional amounts payable in the event of an accidental death, as well as equity in his firm and his 401k, totaled over $2 million. It would be hers if Gary had indeed passed away in a tragic accident. Melody's defense team aimed to demonstrate that the source of the Farris family dysfunction was not their client. It was far more complicated than that. They reiterated issues with Christopher's drinking and stealing. They judged Scott for still living at home and Emily for relying on her father to purchase a new house. Money was a motivating factor for each of them, they argued, not just Melody. They also drew attention to Gary's longtime secretary, a woman named Angela Phillips. Angela had worked for Gary for 28 years, even coming with him when he was transferred to Atlanta to open the firm's office there.
Can you tell the jury, when you moved to Georgia, did your relationship with Gary ever cross from professional to personal?
Unfortunately, it did. And then, unfortunately, there were a couple of instances where, long hours, sometimes alcohol involved, things crossed a line.
And it became physical?
Yes.
Angela testified that her romantic relationship with Gary was short-lived. It had taken place only when they were younger, in the 90s, and she could not recall if they had ever slept together. The two had remained close friends. She recalled receiving a phone call from Melody to inform her of Gary's death.
I couldn't fathom any way that he got there. She suggested maybe he had a spell and fell in, and that didn't make any sense to me. His spells were never bad enough that he would fall into a fire and not be able to pull himself out. And I asked, would there be an autopsy? To which she said, oh, there's not enough remains for an autopsy, which just made my blood turn cold and still does.
In the many years that had passed since Melody's arrest, her relationship with Rusty Barton had come to an end. Whether their loyalty to each other had faded, however, was still an open question. The two were known to be on the phone together on the night of the murder. His alibi for the time period was supported by receipts from shopping trips he made around his home in Tennessee during that time, proving he was nowhere near the farm on Purcell Lane. Investigators did find, however, that he performed curious internet searches in the wake of the murder, including, if the police have a cell phone number, can they get all of your text messages?
When it comes to your feelings for the defendant at this moment, how much love do you have for her?
Don't know that that's a measurable item.
That's what you have to do in court, sir. Tell me how much love you have for her right at the moment.
I do not know.
Do you love her?
I do not know.
But you did love her in the past, correct?
Correct.
You were in love with her, fair to say?
Yes.
And she was in love with you, fair to say?
Yes.
Their romance had developed under the nose of his stepmother, Melody's second cousin, Martha Jane. Rusty spoke of how heartbroken Martha would have been to learn of the affair. She was a God-fearing woman who would never have approved of their relationship. Rusty testified that he owned over 40 firearms, but all of his handguns had been accounted for. His late father had also owned guns, however, which remained in the home he had shared with Martha Jane, the same house that Melody would often visit.
When they would see each other, would the defendant come to Martha Jane's house or home?
Yes.
And would she be family and have access to the home?
Yes.
Come and go as she please?
Yes.
Full access to everywhere in the house?
Yes.
Could even come to the house when Martha Jane's not there?
Yes.
Rusty also formally recanted the bombshell statement he made to law enforcement years prior when he recalled Melody telling him that Gary was in the burn pile. He told the jury that he made the statement under duress. Since that time, he had tried repeatedly to clarify the statement. He was horrified that it had been unfairly used as evidence against Melody in her preliminary court hearing.
But in June of 2019, we call it recant, but you're not really recanting. You're just trying to better explain what she said to you, right? And when she said it.
But what was said was not changed. It was just when it was said.
Okay, so just kind of better explain that to the jury, because that's a lot of what this case is coming down to. The district attorney is putting their case on the words that come out of your mouth.
Right.
So I need you to explain those words to that jury right there.
She said those words to me.
Okay.
I heard them. I just, in my confusion and pressure of, I got to do something, they're going to arrest me. They're going to ruin my name. They're going to put me, line me up. It came out because Bobby didn't even know I was going to say that.
Bobby didn't even know?
No.
So that's just what you felt like you had to do to preserve yourself?
Yes.
But then you tried to explain later that, yes, she told you about that, but that was after Gary was already found, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The gun used to kill Gary Farris was never found. Law enforcement searched the property thoroughly, even sending divers to skim the farm's pond. Prosecutors continued to point to Scott's statements made immediately following the murder, that he had spotted a handgun in the basement of the house that was unaccounted for. Over 5 years later, Chris's wife, Jenna, who by the time of the trial had become his ex-wife, claimed also to have seen a handgun in the family home. Her description of the firearm varied from the one offered by Scott. She stated that the gun was inside a cadenza drawer in the basement, a different location to where Scott had reportedly seen a gun. Law enforcement did not locate this firearm if it was, in fact, the same gun. They could not point definitively to the origin of the murder weapon. That is, until over 1 week into the trial, when a county detective received a call from Martha Jane Barton. In this surprise development, the state believed they had their answer.
Who am I speaking to?
Captain Hands.
This is Martha Barton in Tullahoma, Tennessee.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm sure you're very aware of the case of Melody Farris that's going on right now.
I am.
Well, Detective Hoke and Hayes came to my house along earlier the TBI came. They never asked me if we had any guns. I was very weak one day when she was here, and I told her for several things that I shouldn't have, but she had a way of, she was family. And I told her where those 2 guns were.
Martha Jane took the stand a few days later. She had viewed some of the trial online, only learning of Rusty and Melody's affair at that time. She testified that a .38 Special in a leather holster had been gifted to her by her husband in the 1970s. Melody knew where in the house she had kept it. The gun had gone missing.
Up to that point, had anybody told you not to watch it?
No.
Okay. And did you see Rusty testify?
I saw part of his testimony.
How did that make you feel?
Disappointed.
Did the .38 Special pistol, I'm going to ask you some questions later on, but just right at the moment, did the pistol go missing?
It did.
Did you start looking for things in your house?
I did.
How much did you tear your house up and things in the house looking for it?
I knew that it was only upstairs.
She recounted calling Detective Hands to report her missing handgun.
I think I started out with, I have a heavy heart. And then I told him that I had a gun that was missing.
The defense continued the approach of laying blame upon the Farris children. Perhaps their strongest case was made by the last of the adult children, Amanda Bruce, formerly Amanda Farris. She painted a picture of her siblings as financial leeches, and she supported her mother's claim of innocence.
I approach things differently than my siblings did.
What does that mean?
Meaning I never wanted anything in return for his love. I just, especially right before he died, I just wanted a mother and a father, and that was it. I didn't want any more of the drama. I didn't want any more of their marital problems. I didn't want to deal with any of it. I just wanted a mom and a dad.
And how did you know that he was stealing money from your dad?
Well, my mother made it very apparent. There was never any dirty laundry that both of them weren't willing to air out to all of their children.
So
there was
your
no
dad
boundary.
would do that too.
Yeah.
So he would say, Chris is stealing from me.
Correct.
Okay. And was that in the months and weeks leading up to his death?
Years.
For years?
It's been a problem for as long as the girls have been around.
After discussing Chris's stealing, she spoke about Scott's troubles.
So back to Scott, and how did it come to pass that he wound up on the farm that you knew of?
Because he couldn't make it on his own. It was kind of a running joke that he just was always he'd complain that, oh, mama told me to do this or daddy told me to do that. And I'm like, well, move out. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, don't live with your parents. They always said, oh, I'm going to work on the farm, or I'd work on the farm and things like, yeah, he did. I mean, I guess, but so did my dad. So did my mom. It was a kid that was living at home. And that was about it.
Do you think he was taking advantage of them?
I think anybody who asks their parents for money over the age of 20, 25 are taking advantage of people.
Amanda also offered an explanation for the blood trail in the house. One of the dogs, she said, had bitten her father's ankle. He had walked downstairs to the basement before stopping the bleeding. Melody Farris chose not to testify. In closing arguments, the state emphasized that the most obvious explanation was the most likely. Melody had made no secret of wanting her husband dead.
There was blood found in her home. There was a bullet found in her home. She was framed. It was planted. That's not reasonable. She just happened to also be having a long-standing affair. Not only that, but she just so happened to be taking care of a woman who owned a .38 snub-nosed revolver in a leather holster that her son saw in the basement of her home. Another coincidence? No, ladies and gentlemen, that's called evidence. Because, she has to tell Scott to come home. She calls him and she's like, what time are you going to be home? The horses got out. And I want you to think about this. In her statements to Detective Hayes and Detective Kuykendall, she talks about these horses getting out. I think it starts like before dinner. You weren't chasing horses. You were murdering your husband. She had to call Scott because she didn't know what time he'd be home. She had to call Scott to see what time he'd be home. Because then, when she says, well, the horses got out, and he's like, okay, I'm coming home. She's like, well, I got him put up. Okay, then why are you calling? It doesn't make sense. The horses are the cover-up. It wouldn't have been easy for anyone to move that body. Not Scott by himself, not Chris by himself. Anyone would have needed something. And you know what? It's okay if you all think different ways in which she moved his body. One of you could think she used the tractor. One of you could think she used the RTV. One of you could think she literally just got down and rolled in there. It was all downhill. You saw. One of you could think she tied him up like a deer to the back of the RTV and dragged him over there. But he ended up on that burn pile. And a fairy didn't put him there. A murder fairy didn't put him there. No one else. There is no evidence anyone else is on that property.
The defense attempted to discredit the 3 eldest children, who they argued only viewed their father as a bank account.
This is their evidence, right? Their evidence is Scott located a gun in the basement. That gun is corroborated by Martha James saying that her gun was stolen, right? Because they're similar in the slide I just showed you. So they're similar. All right. Now, what intelligent human being, if you're planning to commit a murder, stores your murdering weapon in the living quarters of your victim? That is the most asinine thing I have ever heard. If I'm going to murder someone or shoot someone, I'm going to keep my gun close to me, in my part of the house, in my purse, in my pocket, in my car. I'm not going to store it in my husband, according to them, that she despises, behind the couch that he sits on and watches TV, where Scott claims that he sits and watches TV. What sense does that make? Scott and Chris and Emily wanted to get on the stand, or did get on the stand, and basically say, oh, Daddy dearest, I loved him so much, I miss him, I can't believe this. While at the same time, you got Chris robbing him blind, him actually saying he was stealing, him admitting that he had used his bank accounts because he had the account numbers and all that, which is illegal, and he was doing it without Gary's permission. Gary actually texted him and said, your stealing has got to stop. Scott texted Melody saying, is he gone? Wanting to know if Gary was gone so he didn't have to do anything anymore. Those aren't the text messages of somebody who, you truly love this man. No, that was just their bank. And he was getting ready to cut them off.
To discredit Martha Jane's assertion that she was missing a gun, they suggested she was angered over the discovery of the affair that had been hidden from her for years.
That she was embarrassed. She was furious at this affair that she found out about, essentially on live television. Now everybody in Tullahoma knows it. She says she got to hang her head whenever she goes. Rusty destroyed the Barton name, but she came up with this lie because of YouTube and this trial being on television. That's the only way that she came up with this.
Finally and dramatically, the defense hammered away at the gaps in the state's theory of the crime. What they said must have happened was not physically possible.
I think it starts to become clear why I'm doing this. Why am I dropping these bags? These bags are 40 pounds apiece. I've got a few more bags to go. But I want you to know that it starts to become very impossible when you add this up, that someone who weighs 120 pounds can move this. That is a doubt. And it's over. But there was a person on the property who could. And that's Scott Farris. This is 320 pounds. I am 185 pounds. And that's all I have. The heaviest doubt of all, that they have provided you with no means, plan that this could have ever happened by Melody. They have established there was tractors on the property and RTVs, but as my client, or as my partner very clearly laid out to you, I'm sorry. As my partner very clearly laid out to you, they didn't do their job. They've provided no way that she could have done this.
The jury deliberated for a handful of hours over the next 2 days. On the third, they put in a full day of discussion, finally delivering their verdict on day 4.
The jury has the account of count 5. We find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 4, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 3, we find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 2, find the defendant guilty. And we, the jury, as to count 1, find the defendant guilty.
All right, so we'll hand it back to the bailiff.
The verdict was not much of a shock to many who had closely followed the evidence presented at trial. What was shocking was the speech delivered to the court weeks later by Melody Farris at her sentencing hearing. She proclaimed that after 6 years and a 3-week-long trial, she was finally ready to reveal what she knew, who really killed her husband, Gary.
I've waited for years to make this statement to everyone. I want the world to know who did this. I have always heard that the courtroom is the last place you're going to get the truth. And has that ever been proven to be the truth in this case? Not only did I not do this, I know who did. I know Scott killed his father. He took my husband, the father of Chris, Emily, and Amanda. He took Big Daddy from our grandchildren. Scott, this is unforgivable. Scott has spent an entire life of loving and protecting you, but this I refuse to cover for you. My mother, your mom, begged me to take the blame for this. She said after she talked to you, after Gary died, that she knew you had done it. Her exact words were, "You are his mother. You have to take blame for this." And I told her no, that I couldn't. I still have 3 other children, grandchildren, and this is not a stolen credit card, a check, or a diamond ring that you've pawned, all of which you have done.
Melody was eventually cut off by objections from the prosecutors, but not before she had delivered her most hurtful accusations. The judge sentenced the 64-year-old to life in prison. She does have the possibility of parole. That was the tragic case of Gary Farris. Thank you once again for joining me, and a special thanks to Care and Turtle6262 for joining our Members Lounge. I'm Kevin, this is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.
Scream saves, I can hear the cries repeat. Gotta take my time, cause these crimes get deep, but these stories can't hide. Let me find my seat. Kevin, go ahead and settle in. Gotta be selective, doing all the research, keeping it objective. Always been effective, can say he got a knack. Pick of the litter, you see how Newton got his back. Yeah, the content.